Ancient civilizations, forbidden texts, and lost doctrines tell a very different story from what you've been taught. They describe a reality in which you existed before birth, fully aware, fully conscious, and possessing knowledge that has been deliberately erased. This isn't some vague spiritual metaphor. This is a concrete, detailed history buried under millennia of suppression. Let's talk about the forbidden book, the one that has never been fully revealed, the one hidden in pieces across ancient texts, religious scriptures, and esoteric teachings. If you take those pieces and put them together, something terrifyingly clear emerges. The world we are born into is a construct, and before you entered it, you knew exactly what you were walking into. The ancient Mesopotamians, the first civilization to leave written records, described a place called the House of Dust, a shadowy realm where souls awaited before returning to the world. But unlike the dead, these preborn souls were not wandering aimlessly. They were undergoing preparation. For what? For erasure. The Greeks, known for their philosophical brilliance, spoke of the river Lethe, the river of forgetting. Before entering the world, souls were required to drink from it, wiping their memories clean. The Orphic cults, however, preserved an even darker secret. Some souls, they claimed, resisted. They did not drink. And those who retained their knowledge became what the ancients called the awakened ones, the very individuals who would later be hunted down as heretics, mystics, and rebels against the system. Kabbalistic texts speak of the Guf, the treasury of souls, where all unborn spirits reside before being placed into human bodies. But the Zohar, one of Kabbalah's foundational texts, suggests something shocking. Some souls do not want to be born. They resist incarnation. They know something the rest of us have forgotten. And yet, one by one, they are forced into the cycle of birth. By whom? And for what purpose? The ancient Egyptians, a civilization obsessed with the afterlife, also had a lesser-known doctrine about the before life. The Book of the Dead, which many assume is just a guide to the afterlife, contains passages hinting at a judgment that happens before birth. Not after. Before. The soul is weighed, not for sins, but for readiness. And those deemed ready are sent down. But what does readies mean? Ready for what? Now, this is where things get uncomfortable. Because once you start connecting the dots, a disturbing pattern emerges. Nearly every ancient civilization describes a process that happens before birth. But more than that, they describe a force, a system, that ensures you do not remember. The Gnostics, early Christian sects declared heretical and systematically wiped out, were very clear about this. They believed that the material world is a prison and that the beings overseeing it, known as the archons, are responsible for keeping human souls trapped in an endless cycle of birth and forgetting. They believed that before birth, souls were interrogated, wiped, and deceived into entering the world. And once they arrived, the programming continued. Through language, through culture, through the institutions that dictate what we can and cannot know. You see, this isn't just about before birth. This is about control. The Tibetans, one of the last cultures to preserve unbroken spiritual traditions dating back thousands of years, have an entire text dedicated to the moment of transition between worlds. The Bardo Thodol, or Tibetan Book of the Dead, describes in extreme detail the journey a soul takes between death and rebirth. But here's what's strange: the descriptions of what happens before rebirth are eerily similar to what happens after death. Why? Because they're the same process in reverse. And according to the text, if a soul remembers what is happening, it can escape. But how many of us remember? The truth is, almost none. Because you were not supposed to remember. Every major esoteric tradition, from Hermeticism to Sufism, from the hidden teachings of early Christianity to the suppressed doctrines of Eastern traditions, has whispered the same idea: if you knew what happened before birth, you would not participate in this system. You would not consent to it. And that is why they make sure you forget. Before you were born, you were judged. Not in some metaphorical, religious sense. Literally. You stood before something or someone, and your fate was decided. You were not simply sent into this world. You were evaluated, examined, and then pushed through a system that dictated your next reality. Every major ancient tradition left behind traces of this idea, buried under layers of rewritten history. The Tibetans described it in the Bardo Thodol, the Gnostics in their lost scriptures, and the Hindus in the Akhic records, the cosmic archive of all souls. But the one thing they all agree on? Before you could be born, you had to pass through the gatekeepers. Who or what are they? Across different civilizations, these figures have been given many names. The ancient Greeks spoke of the Moirai, the fates, who decided where a soul would go. The ancient Egyptians described the 42 judges, who stood in the halls of Ma'at to determine whether a soul could proceed. The early Christians had the principalities and powers, cosmic authorities who dictated the rules of incarnation. And the Gnostics? They spoke of something far more disturbing, the archons, rulers of the material world who ensured that no soul entered this existence with their memories intact. This isn't mythology. This is a pattern. A pattern that suggests before birth you were confronted with a choice. A choice that most people never even realized they made. In the Zohar, a foundational text of Kabbalah, it is written that every soul must swear an oath before descending into the physical realm. What is that oath? To forget everything. To enter the world blind. Some traditions say this is necessary so that the soul can experience life without the burden of previous existences. Others? They say it's a system of control. The Gnostics believed the interrogation before birth wasn't just about forgetting. It was about programming. According to them, before entering a new life, souls were tested, categorized, and given a false sense of purpose. Some souls were sent into lives of privilege, others into suffering. Some were given certain abilities, others were deliberately weakened. And the ones who resisted the process? The ones who tried to retain their knowledge? They were recycled, forced through again and again until they complied. Now, let's take a step back. Because if this is true, it changes everything. The Tibetan Buddhists, who have preserved their traditions with shocking consistency for thousands of years, describe something eerily similar. According to them, before a soul is born, it encounters beings that test it. These entities appear as guides or judges, but their real role is to enforce submission. If a soul refuses to enter a body, it is confronted, pressured, even deceived. Many traditions describe souls being shown false visions of their future life, made to believe that they are choosing something meaningful, when in reality, the entire process is rigged. There are people, very few, who remember this moment. Not as a dream, not as an abstract vision, but as a clear, specific event. They describe encountering beings of immense power, entities that asked them questions, tested them, even commanded them. Some recall resisting, only to be pulled back and forced into birth anyway. Others recall being shown glimpses of different possible lives, but only being allowed to choose within strict limitations. And then, of course, they forget. At least, most of them do. But once in a while, someone slips through. A child is born with inexplicable memories. A person has a near-death experience and suddenly recalls a time before they were even alive. Sometimes, hypnosis unlocks something buried so deep that it defies explanation. And what do they describe? A system. A machine. A process designed not just to erase memory, but to ensure that every soul is molded before entering the world. Before birth, you knew too much. That's why they made you forget. This isn't speculation. It's documented in ancient texts, hidden in religious doctrines, and buried under layers of rewritten history. Nearly every major civilization described a moment before birth where something, whether it was a divine force, cosmic law, or something far less benevolent, erased everything you knew. The question is, why? Ancient Hindu texts speak of the veil of Maya, an illusion cast over human consciousness to blind us from our true nature. The Greeks believed in the river Lethe, a compulsory ritual of forgetting. The Gnostics described the archons, entities whose entire function was to wipe a soul's memory clean before it entered a body. Even modern neuroscience backs this up. Studies show that infants display knowledge and instincts that seemingly vanish as they develop. But is this just natural brain development? Or something else entirely? A woman in a controlled regression study recalled an experience before she was born. She described a realm of light where she was given instructions, then told she must drink something. She resisted. She didn't want to forget. The beings in charge, whomever they were, grew impatient. She was pulled into a structure that pulsated like a machine. Then, darkness. She was born. Another case, an NDE survivor who came back with inexplicable memories, said that before birth, he was shown a vision of the life he would live. When he hesitated, the beings around him became forceful. "You must go," they said. "You agreed to forget." He asked why. He was told, because knowing ruins the game. The game? This isn't just spiritual theory. This is a documented pattern repeated across time and culture. The Tibetans wrote about souls resisting birth, fighting against the forces that push them into new bodies. The Zoroastrians spoke of souls being purified through forgetting, stripped of their past identities. Even early Christian sects, before they were wiped out, taught that forgetting was not natural, but enforced. And if this system exists, it raises an even bigger question: what was erased from you? Some say the knowledge of previous lives. Others believe it's something much bigger, the memory of what we truly are, what reality actually is, and, most importantly, who is running this system. Because make no mistake, this is a system. It is organized. It has rules. And it doesn't tolerate those who resist. The people who claim to remember what happens before birth, they almost always describe being watched, observed, evaluated. And when they try to retain their knowledge, when they fight against the forgetting, they are forced through again. Some describe being pulled into vortexes, others describe flashing lights, machines, even voices commanding them to submit. This isn't reincarnation the way most people think about it. This isn't some peaceful cycle of spiritual evolution. This is a process of control. Most people forget, but some remember. Religions have a word for them. So do ancient secret societies, intelligence agencies, and even modern psychologists studying unexplained cognitive phenomena. They go by many names: the awakened, the old souls, the ones who slipped through the cracks. In some cultures, they are revered. In others, they are hunted. The simple fact is that these people should not exist because the system depends on you forgetting. In Tibet, children are identified as possible tulkas, reincarnated masters who retain their past life memories. The search for them is meticulous. When a child shows signs of remembering who they were before, monks travel to their villages, testing them with objects they once owned in a previous life. If they choose correctly, it confirms they have evaded the forgetting. But here's the question: why do they have to be found? Why is this so rare? And what about the others who remember but aren't identified? Many don't survive. The Cathars, a medieval Christian sect, believed that certain individuals carried knowledge from before birth and that this knowledge threatened the Church's control over human souls. The Church responded with one of the most brutal genocides in history. In 1244, over 200 Cathars were burned alive at Montségur for refusing to convert. Their crime? Claiming they knew where they came from. In Hindu and Buddhist traditions, sages and yogis dedicated their lives to breaking the cycle of forgetting, preserving their pre-birth knowledge through intense meditation and spiritual discipline. Some of these individuals, known as Jivanmuktas, claim to have full awareness of their existence before they were born. But here's the catch: most people who tried to reach this state failed. Why? Because the system is designed to keep you from remembering. The world is engineered to distract you, to ensure that by the time you're old enough to speak, whatever you knew before is already buried deep beneath conditioning, language, and programming. But every once in a while, a child breaks through. There are documented cases of young children recalling explicit details about a life before they were born, details they could not possibly have known. In the 1950s, a boy in India named Shanti Devi gave intricate details about a past life, down to the names of family members she had never met. Investigators verified her claims. In the 1990s, an American boy named James Leininger provided specific military details about a World War II pilot, later confirmed to be real. Mainstream science labels this as cryptomnesia, hidden memory surfacing through unknown means. But here's the problem: some of these cases involve information that the child had no way of accessing. Not just names, but obscure personal details, places they had never visited, knowledge of events before they were born. And then, as they get older, something strange happens. The memories fade. The children grow up, and by the time they reach adulthood, the knowledge disappears. Not because they want it to, but because it wasn't supposed to be there in the first place. Ancient texts warn about this exact process. The Gnostics claimed that the rulers of this world, the archons, specifically target those who remember. Hindu philosophy warns that the moment a child begins to speak, their past knowledge is at risk of being overwritten. The Tibetans teach that if a reincarnated master is not identified in childhood, their knowledge will be completely lost by the time they reach adulthood. And that raises a terrifying question: what would happen if someone made it through intact? Not just glimpses of past lives. Not vague recollections of a mystical pre-birth realm. But someone who never lost their memories at all. Someone who could expose the system from the inside. Someone who knew, beyond any doubt, what this world actually is and why we are here. Where were you before you were born? Not in some abstract spiritual sense. Literally. Where were you? Ancient texts, mystical traditions, and rare first-hand accounts all point to a reality that existed before birth, but there's one crucial detail they all hint at without fully exposing: was it a choice, or were we forced into it? Because here's something that should concern you: there is almost no culture, no ancient teaching, no major religious text that describes the pre-birth state as a place of complete freedom. There is no tradition that says, you can simply choose not to be born. Instead, what we see is a pattern: preparation, selection, judgment, and an eventual descent into the physical world. But who is making the decisions? And why does it seem like the soul is given only one option: entering this reality? The ancient Hindus spoke of a place called Pitraloka, where souls awaited their next incarnation. Some described it as peaceful, others as a type of holding area, a temporary state where the soul was not in control of what happened next. The Gnostics took it further. They claimed that the material world itself is a trap, and that before birth, souls were processed, categorized, and forcibly sent back down. Some tried to resist, but resistance was met with force. The Tibetans preserved one of the most detailed descriptions of what happens before birth. The Bardo Thodol, often called the Tibetan Book of the Dead, doesn't just describe the journey after death, it describes what happens before life begins again. According to this text, a soul does not simply choose a new life. It is pushed, tested, and in many cases, deceived. The text warns that souls will encounter visions that may seem beautiful, welcoming, and full of light, but are actually illusions meant to lure them into accepting a new incarnation. Some traditions go even further, suggesting that beings in this realm actively manipulate souls into reincarnating, ensuring that they do not escape the cycle. The Sumerians, one of the oldest known civilizations, left behind texts describing the Anunnaki, powerful entities who were said to control human destinies. Some of these texts, those that were buried, erased, or reinterpreted, suggest that before birth, souls entered into an agreement, a contract of some kind. But here's the problem: there is no record of any soul refusing the contract and leaving the system. Because if pre-birth is a place where souls exist before entering the cycle of life, shouldn't there be stories, somewhere, of souls opting out? Shouldn't there be teachings about how to leave permanently? But there aren't. Instead, the overwhelming majority of ancient sources describe a process that ensures a soul returns. Some esoteric schools claim that this reality is a closed system, one where the idea of free will is an illusion. Before birth, you were given what seemed like choices. Maybe you were shown different lives. Maybe you were given the illusion of picking a path. But if you never had the option to walk away, was it ever a real choice? There are rare accounts, deep in hidden occult traditions, that speak of souls who attempted to escape. Some texts refer to them as the lost ones, the beings who refused incarnation and vanished. Others describe them as the missing, souls that somehow slipped past the gatekeepers and disappeared into a realm beyond the known universe. If you were born into a system that makes you forget everything before birth, who benefits from your ignorance? Because if there is a process that forces souls into new lives, ensures they forget what came before, and strips them of any ability to escape, then someone is running that system. Ancient cultures had different names for these entities. The Gnostics called them the archons, rulers of the material world who operate beyond human perception. The Hindus described them as asuras, deceptive beings that maintain illusion and control. The Egyptians warned of hidden gatekeepers in the duat, the realm between death and rebirth, whose job was to test and restrict passage. And in every one of these traditions, the message is the same: the physical world is not neutral. It is designed. It is controlled. So let's break it down. If you were to design a system where souls are trapped in an endless loop, what would it look like? You would need to ensure they 1. Don't remember where they came from. 2. Don't question why they are here. 3. Believe that everything is natural and inevitable. That is exactly what we see. You are born into a world where your past is erased, where your identity is reprogrammed, and where your focus is redirected away from the truth. Every civilization that has ever existed has developed belief systems that reinforce the forgetting process. Some call it reincarnation, some call it fate, some call it divine will, but the one thing they all have in common: none of them tell you how to leave. The Gnostics were perhaps the most direct about this. They believed that the rulers of the material world, non-human entities that existed beyond our perception, designed this entire system as a form of soul farming. Their claim? Humanity is being used. These beings don't just oversee reincarnation, they actively feed on the energy generated through suffering, struggle, and conflict. And before you dismiss that as myth, consider this: why is suffering the default state of existence? Why is happiness always temporary, always conditional, always something you have to earn, but pain, trauma, and struggle come effortlessly? The Sumerians, one of the first recorded civilizations, described a pantheon of deities known as the Anunnaki, beings who created humans for one purpose: to serve. Their texts, some of the oldest ever discovered, describe a system where souls are sent back into bodies generation after generation, fulfilling roles preordained by forces beyond their control. The Tibetans took this further. They claimed that after death, souls are confronted with dazzling lights and visions designed to lure them back into the cycle. If a soul resists, it is confronted with images of its worst fears, forcing it to retreat back into reincarnation for another chance. The Hermeticists, early practitioners of esoteric philosophy, warned that the physical world was an illusion maintained by hidden forces. Their texts describe souls being reprocessed through planetary spheres, where each layer stripped away more knowledge until nothing remained but a blank slate. A soul that resists, it is forcibly reincarnated under more restrictive conditions. So let's be clear, this isn't random. It is systematic. It is structured. It has rules. And most disturbingly, it has enforcers. Because every system needs maintenance. If souls were allowed to remember, to resist, to exit the cycle, the system would collapse. So who makes sure that doesn't happen? The Gnostics say the archons do. The Hindus say the asuras do. The Egyptians said the hidden judges of the underworld do. And in the modern world? We are programmed to police ourselves. From childhood, we are conditioned to mock, reject, and attack anyone who suggests that reality isn't what it seems. Not because people are naturally hostile to the idea, but because they were trained to be. Scattered throughout history, there are methods, rituals, exercises, initiations designed to recover pre-birth knowledge. These methods were never taught publicly. They were never part of mainstream religion. They were hidden, locked away, passed down only to those deemed capable of handling the truth. And here's what's interesting: across vastly different cultures, across thousands of years, these techniques are strikingly similar. In ancient Egypt, The mystery schools trained initiates to retain their consciousness through death and rebirth. The most advanced among them underwent something called the rite of the second birth, a process in which the soul left the body, navigated the hidden realms, and returned without forgetting. This was not a metaphor. The Egyptians believed that memory could be retained through precise control of consciousness at the moment of transition. The Tibetans developed an even more direct method. The Dzogchen tradition teaches that enlightenment can be achieved in a single lifetime, but more importantly, that those who master it can remember past existences and bypass forced reincarnation. Tibetan monks practice Fawa, a technique where the soul consciously exits the body at death, evading the traps set in the afterlife. Their belief? If you do it correctly, you do not return. The Gnostics had their own system. They believed that pre-birth memory could be recovered through direct experience, not faith. Their initiates underwent extreme mental and physical trials, pushing their consciousness to states where they could bypass the programming of the physical world. Many of their techniques involved lucid dreaming, altered states, and direct communication with non-physical intelligences, practices that modern science now cautiously acknowledges as real neurological phenomena. Then there's the Hermetic tradition, which influenced everything from Renaissance alchemy to modern secret societies. The Hermeticists claimed that human consciousness had been deliberately severed from its original state, but that by training the mind through specific disciplines, the barrier could be broken. They practiced silent meditation for days at a time, fasting, dream control, and the deliberate triggering of near-death experiences. The goal? To slip past the forgetting process and access the hidden memories locked inside the soul. But here's where it gets even stranger. Certain individuals throughout history have remembered without any training. Not mystics, not monks, ordinary people who, for reasons we still don't understand, never fully lost their pre-birth knowledge. And when they spoke out, they were silenced. In 1930s France, a young boy named Charles claimed he could recall choosing to be born, describing a pre-life council that showed him different life options. He said he rejected them all, but was eventually forced into a body. His parents dismissed it. The story disappeared. In 1970s Brazil, a woman named Luciana, after a near-death experience, suddenly remembered everything. She claimed that before birth, she had been in a vast, structured place where she was assigned a role and made to forget. She spent the next decade trying to prove her memories were real, only to be declared mentally unstable and institutionalized. And there's more. In multiple cultures, there are accounts of children speaking in languages they never learned, describing events before birth in detail, even recalling the faces of people who existed before their own time. What happens to them? The memories fade, or they're dismissed, or, in rare cases, they simply vanish from history. Everything we've covered leads to one final, unavoidable question: if there is a system designed to erase memory before birth, if ancient cultures warned about entities controlling the reincarnation cycle, if a select few have broken through and retained their memories, then what is behind it all? Because nothing this structured happens by accident. Religions, philosophies, and secret traditions across time have hinted at the existence of a hidden force managing human souls. The names change, but the function remains the same. Some call them gods, some call them cosmic administrators, some describe them as interdimensional entities. The Gnostics believed the archons were in charge, siphoning human energy by trapping souls in the physical world. The Hindus described the Devas and Asuras, battling for influence over human reincarnation. The Egyptians spoke of Thoth and the hidden judges, calculating who would return and who might escape. But here's what no one seems to ask: why is escape even an option at all? If this system is so complete, if it's so locked down, why do we have accounts of people slipping through? Why are there techniques, however rare, that allow for the recovery of pre-birth memories? It suggests something massive: the system is not perfect. Some individuals are waking up. Some have never fully lost their memories. Some are actively working to break the cycle. And the biggest fear of those running this system? That more people will realize it. History is full of sudden leaps in human consciousness. Unexplained explosions of knowledge, disruptive individuals who reveal forbidden ideas, movements that arise out of nowhere and shake the foundations of control. The Renaissance, the Enlightenment, revolutions of thought that seemingly erupted from nothing. But what if they weren't random? What if they were the result of cracks in the system? What if, throughout history, individuals have regained knowledge they were never meant to recover, and every time that happens, the system has to work harder to shut it down? Look at the patterns. Every major human advancement, scientific, philosophical, spiritual, has been fiercely opposed by the dominant power structures. Every challenge to the official story has been buried, censored, or destroyed. Even today, questioning the nature of existence beyond the accepted models is mocked, ridiculed, and suppressed. Because the last thing the system wants is for you to ask, "Where was I before I was born?" That's why every trace of this knowledge has been fragmented, erased, or repackaged into harmless mythology. That's why those who remember don't last long in history books. That's why the ancient warnings about pre-birth erasure have been rewritten as religious allegory instead of literal fact. The reality is, someone knows exactly what happens before birth. Someone has access to the full system, the records, the mechanics of how this works. Governments, secret societies, esoteric schools, there are always people operating just outside public knowledge, preserving what the rest of the world is forced to forget. And if that's true, then there's one final, undeniable conclusion: this world is not what you think it is. Your existence, your very presence in this reality, was not random, not accidental, not freely chosen in the way you were led to believe. The world before birth was hidden from you for a reason. And the forces that erased your memories did so with one goal: to keep you from knowing the truth. But cracks are appearing. The knowledge is resurfacing. And once you start seeing the system for what it is, you can never unsee it. Thank you for watching.